In here today we are going to be making a mushroom tortellini soup, some strawberry scones because our strawberry muffins yesterday were such a hit. There, you've got like two left, and what else are we going to do? I think that's what. Oh, and we're gonna make our pastrami sandwiches. I was like, forgetting. So let's get our soup prepped and ready to go. So we're gonna start sautéing up our onions. So I'm gonna put about a tablespoon of olive oil in my Dutch oven. And I'm going to turn it to about a medium. And then we're going to slice up one nice big yellow onion. We're going to take off the ends, and then we're just going to peel this kind of outer shell off. Throw those in the trash. And then we're going to dice this up, kind of nice small dice, so that we don't have any massive chunks of onions in our soup. And we'll let them caramelize up so that they can really bring out the nice flavors to really enhance our broth. And let's get this guy. And this again is going to be part of our base for our broth for our tortellini and mushroom soup. Perfect. Okay. We're going to put these in our olive oil in our Dutch oven, which we have warming up. And then I'll give it a nice stir to coat them all with the olive oil. And then we're going to start prepping our scones. So let's give it a nice stir here. There we go. Okay. For our strawberry scones, we're going to dice up our strawberries first. And then we'll toss them with a little bit of cornstarch and sugar. And the reason we toss strawberries first, and then we'll toss them with a little bit of cornstarch and sugar. And the reason we toss them with the cornstarch is so that instead of getting super like juicy in our batter for our scones, more like a dough, the cornstarch will like juicy in our batter for our scones, more like a dough. The cornstarch will allow them to kind of turn to a nice strawberry gel instead. So we'll make a little slurry with it. So I'm just cutting off the tops here, and then we're going to do kind of a nice small dice on all of them because you don't want any super huge sweat out too much liquid. And again, you don't want to have it really liquidy because then it'll just give you a soggy spot in your scone. And you want kind of nice flaky layers. So we'll just do some quick dice on here, and then I'll go over all the way with my knives. Here we go. But yesterday we made our strawberry muffins, and they literally just two left. They were such a hit. And I think those will be gone by tonight. So I'm like, we've got to make something else because I typically like to make either a scone or a muffin to have just like my kids, for my little ones, they like to have it as like a quick breakfast when they first wake up in the morning. And or an afternoon snack. So we always have like a muffin or a scone laying around, and now we are practically out. There we go. Just got one more strawberry to chop up. And then what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to go over with my knife a couple more times just to make sure we don't have any really big chunks. Because unlike blueberries or some like other things that you might mix into your scone, strawberries have a lot of water in them, a lot of liquid. So we don't want them to sweat out too much in our scone. Okay, we've got our diced up strawberries here. And we're going to coat them with a little bit of cornstarch, about a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half. And I'm just going to sprinkle it right over the top here. And then we're going to add a little bit of sugar to help kind of sweeten it up so that when the liquids do heat up in the oven, it will make a nice little strawberry flavored gel. So we're going to put about maybe a tablespoon of sugar. There we go. Let me get these strawberries out of the way. And we're going to stir it up. And this is called a slurry. When you use cornstarch with fresh fruit, a little bit of sugar. That process is making a slurry, which you kind of do with pies and things that you're going to bake in the oven because it will make a delicious kind of fruity gel. There we go. And now we're going to let those kind of sit and sweat while we make the rest of our scone. I'm going to give our onions a quick little stir here. Okay, we're going to start by making our dry ingredients, and then we are going to cut a stick of butter into it. So we need 2 cups of all-purpose flour. There we go. So we've got 1 and 2. And then we're going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And this is going to be our rising agent. And you want to make sure you're using baking powder, not baking soda. So 1 and 2. Then we're going to add a half a teaspoon of salt to our scone, our dry scone mix. So there's about a half a teaspoon. And then we are going to add a half a cup of sugar too. There we go. And then I'm going to use just my pastry knife right here. I'm just going to give it a good mix to really incorporate that baking powder and salt and sugar into my flour. There we go. Perfect. And you want to do that because you want, when we cut our butter into it, we don't want like there to be lumps of baking powder, because then that will be a really tart spot in your biscuit and it can cause like uneven patches. So you want nice cold butter. And what I like to do is I'm going to cut it down kind of into little 4 parts, and then I'm going to cut it off. This just makes it easier to cut through it with my pastry cutter versus just putting in a giant big stick here. There you go. So you just need 1 stick of butter, which is a half a cup. And then we're going to use our pastry cutter here, and we're going to cut this butter into it until we have no pieces of butter bigger than a pea. And so I just do, it's like a push and a twist. And this doesn't take very long. And so I always just recommend doing this instead of using a food processor, because that's just hauling out another piece of equipment. And then you've got more stuff to clean. And this guy's really easy. You can just throw him in your dishwasher. He cleans up nicely. There we go. I'm going to give my onions a quick little stir over here. And so we have our onions sauteing up right now for our creamy mushroom and tortellini soup we're going to be making. Up right now for our creamy mushroom and tortellini soup we're going to be making. And now I'm cutting my butter into my flour mixture for our strawberry scones. It's kind of a chilly day today, so I wanted a soup to have with our sandwich. We're going to make a pastrami soup or pastrami sandwich and a soup for lunch. And then we'll have these for desserts and snacks and whatnot. We'll see how long they last. My toddler, my 18-month-old, he just goes over to our little cake platter. That's where we keep our muffins and our scones. And he just screams. He's like, ah, ah. Every time he wants one, you just see him over there reaching his hands up, screaming for something out of there. I said he's got us trained well. Okay, so we've got our butter cut into our flour. We have no really big chunks anymore. I just like to take my like a butter knife through here just to get any butter that's kind of stuck to our pastry cutter. Give my onions. Okay, now we are going to make our wet mixture, and then we'll add it in carefully. Let me get a bowl. We need 1/2 cup of sourdough discard. So I've got my big bowl of sourdough that I need to kind of discard out. And we're going to use a 1/2 cup. And it doesn't have to be active. You know, this is great for when you need to throw out some so you can feed it for your next loaf of bread. But active starter works well too. So if you happen to have that, it doesn't really matter because we're not using it for the rising agent part. There we go. So we've got our 1/2 cup of sourdough starter. We're going to mix in 1 egg. Very nice. Let me grab a fork. And you want to make sure you mix your wet ingredients together well, because once we put it in our dry ingredients, we want to minimize the amount of mixing we're doing. And this is going to come out as a really dry, shaggy dough, and we're going to be doing our pressing and folds to it. Okay. Just like to stir my onions periodically so none of them get dark or brown. We're going to add in 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. Just have like a little bit more in there. Might as well use that last drop up. Okay, and then 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. So we got 1, 2. We're going to give a really good stir or mix it up, and then we are going to add the wet ingredients to our dry ones, and we are just going to stir it, mix it together with a fork, but it's going to be a shaggy dough. And then we're going to add in our strawberries, which will give a little bit more liquid. Okay. So here is our wet mix, which was egg, cream, and sourdough discard and vanilla. And now I'm just going to use my fork here, and we're going to mix it together. Now, this, again, it's going to be very shaggy and dry, which is what you want, because we're going to be doing presses and folds to kind of mix it together like you would with a biscuit. I always say a scone is like a sweet, crunchier biscuit. There we go. And we've got that, and now I'm going to add in my strawberries, but I'm not going to just dump them all in here. What I'm going to do is just scoop them out and leave any excess juice that are out, because if you add them in, it's a bit too wet and it can really kind of mess with the consistency of your dough. There we go. Perfect. And you're aiming for about a cup of diced up strawberries. And I'm just going to do a nice light toss here. Okay. And I do have my oven preheated to 400 degrees. We'll do one last stir on my onions, and now we're going to get to the messy part. We're going to take our shaggy dough here. You can see it's very crumbly. This is what you want, because what we're going to do is, it's called a press and a fold to make our thing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to press and fold in here. And this is going to make a lovely little flaky layers in here. There we go. You see, you don't want to knead it. You want to press and fold, because that's going to give you the delicious flaky layers. We're good. My father-in-law is here. He's here to drop off our dog and their dog while we babysit them. So here we've got our lovely scone dough, and I'm going to divide it into 2 different pucks, and we're going to push it down. There we go. So nicely into these 2 little pucks, just like this. I'm going to get a little bit of flour because, again, the strawberry is a little bit doughier, wet thing, but they'll bake up nicely. But we're just going to sprinkle just a pinch on here for our scones. There we go. So we make the nice little puck form. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use our pastry cutter to transfer these over to our baking sheet that is lined with parchment. There we go. So I'm going to just slide under with there. So we've got our lovely puck here. And then I'm going to slide under here as well. And we're going to transfer it to here. Okay, I'm going to give my hands a quick wash, and then we're going to cut them and brush them with some cream and sugar. But my hands are kind of sticky. Here we go. Give my onions a quick stir. And you're going to use like a pastry cutter like this, and we're just going to cut them in half and then half again, and then we're going to cut them again into eighths. So each puck is going to cut into eighths so that we have a nice like small mini scones. Now you can do one big scone and then cut each one into just one thing in eight, but I prefer the little scones. They cook up a little bit faster. They don't dry out as much, and they're just the perfect size. There we go. So we're just going to cut and pull them apart. We're going to do the same over here. And this is, you can use a butter knife as well, but you don't have to, you can use this. You just want something that's kind of dull, not super sharp, because you don't want to cut into your baking sheet. And we're going to slide them out because you want a little room between each one as they bake, so they bake up nice and even. Very nice. Perfect. So I've got our scones out, and now what we're going to do is we're going to brush them with a little bit of cream and then sprinkle some sugar over them so they have a nice kind of golden coat on them, because I'm not doing a glaze on here. So you need just about a tablespoon of cream, and we're just going to use a little pastry brush, and we're just going to brush the tops. This is going to help give it a nice kind of golden brown color when it bakes up, and then we're going to sprinkle some granulated sugar on it to give it a nice kind of sugar crust. Give it a little bit more sweet, because scones are naturally, they're very mild, like in the sweetness things. They're not overly sweet. Here we go. And perfect. Just a little bit more. And perfect. Got them all coated there. You don't need to drench them, just a nice little covering on it. And then we're just going to take a little bit of sugar, probably a tablespoon for maybe all of this. And you're just going to kind of coat them over the top. This is going to give you a nice sugary crunch on the top of your scone. It's kind of like how we did with our muffins yesterday, but I will say it's more pronounced on our scone because it's a much drier batter. So it gives you a really crunchy top. It's nice. There we go. Perfect. Do one little shake over every single one. And then we're going to pop these in our oven at 400 degrees for 18 minutes. Here we go. These look so yummy. I love strawberries. Are just such a delicious, like, I feel like they're such a summery, springy treat. Okay, we've got our oven preheated. We're going to put them on the top rack. And then I'm going to set my timer for 18 minutes so we don't forget about them. Perfect. Okay, now let's go work on our soup, and then we'll make our sandwiches, our melts. So I'm going to give my onions a nice stir up here. They have been caramelizing up wonderfully while we were making our scones. I always like to start them first because you do want a nice rich caramelization in there. Now we are going to chop up our mushrooms. I've got baby bellas right here, and we're going to add them in there. But I always like to do the onions by themselves, because once you start adding vegetables in there, they just stop the caramelization process. So we're going to slice all of this up. This is about 1.5 pounds of mushrooms for our mushroom and tortellini soup. So you want a good amount, and we're going to saute these nicely with some fresh thyme and dried thyme as well to really bring out some lovely flavors for our broth. We're going to have kind of a creamy mushroom broth.
Yeah, that's one of the dogs' names.
So we have 2 dogs. So ours are Loki and Brunhilde, and she goes by Bruni. And then my parents' dog is with us too, and her name is Grace. And it's actually our dog. We adopted her like last 2 years ago, maybe. So she's 7 or 8. She was actually the mother of my parents' dog. So it's kind of like our dogs are family too, but they don't like each other very much. They're a strange family, I guess. But they're great. They're King Charles Cavalier Spaniels. And you'll probably see our Ruby one, which is the brownish, like the reddish brown one around. He's ginormous. He's really chunky. He's much bigger than the average one because he also really likes my food and he likes stealing it from the little ones. He just goes up and he'll like, my toddler will be eating a scone or a muffin and he just comes up and takes it right out of their hands and eats it. So he enjoys my baking as well. And he is always on a diet, but somehow he is always getting food.
Do you have a question? Do you have a cookbook?
I do not have a cookbook. I've done lots of requests for it. I really just started streaming my cooking just a couple months ago. And I've just been surprised about how much people have enjoyed it. And so I think it might be in the works for maybe this, coming year or next year to make one, as soon as I find time between my children's sports. Say, I do have 5 kids who definitely keep me up on my toes all the time. I'm running around. I feel like I'm a chauffeur half the time. I'm like a cook half the time and a chauffeur the other half. And so we're always going around for sporting events and whatnot. And so there's not a lot of free time. So I've got my about 1.5 pounds of baby Bella mushrooms. We're going to toss them in here with our onions. We're going to let them kind of saute. And while those are sauteing up, I'm going to get some fresh thyme. We're going to use both fresh thyme and dried thyme. I like the mixture of it because it just adds just a lovely, lovely flavor. There we go. So we're going to bring out a couple sprigs of this. And the only problem is I love fresh herbs, but you got to get all these little leaves off to use them because you don't want to use the stems because the stems are just chewy and they don't really have the flavor. So I'd say there are a bit of work to get to the good stuff, but it is worth it. It's a great way to elevate your recipes is just switching out some dry herbs for fresh ones, and you instantly have more of a restaurant quality meal. Okay. I find the best way to kind of de-leaf our things is just to do it by hand. There's just no other good way than your good old-fashioned fingers. So we're going to pluck these leaves off. We're going to get about a teaspoon of fresh thyme, and then we're going to use about 1/2 teaspoon of dried thyme. And that's just to give us a lovely overall, taste, because mushrooms and thyme, I feel like they work really well together. I feel like the earthiness of thyme really brings up kind of the woodsiness of the mushrooms, and it just kind of brings it all together, which is great because that's kind of the star of our tortellini and mushroom soup. So we really want the mushrooms to shine. There we go. And it's okay to have a few little stems in there because you can, but the trick is to get the really big ones, the more fibrous ones that aren't going to mince up nicely. Now I'm going to just go over with my knife and we're going to just mince them up nice and fine. Perfect. And then we're going to toss them in with our mushrooms and our onions so that the heat and the oil that we are sauteing them in can really bring out their kind of flavor. So we have about 1 teaspoon of fresh thyme. Give it a nice stir. And then we are going to add in about 1/2 teaspoon of dried thyme. And dried thyme packs a bit more punch and flavor because when you dry an herb, it shrinks down. So you get a lot more in it than when they're fresh. And then we're going to take about 2 bay leaves and we're going to crunch them up and add them in there as well. This just helps the bay leaves flavors come out a little bit quicker than with when you leave it whole. And when you crush it up like this into fine little pieces, you don't notice it at all. So you just really get nice little flakes. Perfect. We're going to give it a nice stir. And that way the heat can really bring out the flavor of the thyme. It's very aromatic. There we go. Lovely. We're going to put in some fresh garlic, or minced garlic. I always call this fresh garlic, and I know it's more like jarred garlic. We're going to put in about 1.5 teaspoons. Now, if you're going to use fresh garlic, like cut it up and mince it yourself, you probably want about 2 to 3 cloves. Not quite as much as if you're doing this one. This one doesn't have quite as much tanginess and flavor as fresh one, so I always use a bit more. But I find garlic is such a pain. It is worth it in some recipes where garlic is truly the star, but if it's just a sidekick, a little, detail that you aren't going to matter as much, this is what I use. Yes, garlic, I guess. But hey, it saves you that time because, cutting onions are a pain, or shallots, but garlic, you've got so much, and it's such a pain. Okay, we've got our onions. And our mushrooms are starting to sweat up nicely. Okay. We're going to use a little bit of Lowry's garlic salt. Imagine that. And about a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. So the acidity in this is really going to bring out the lovely flavors and kind of make a really lovely broth. So just about a tablespoon. You don't need too much. And then we're going to use about 1/2 cup of red wine. I have my red wine stored in this little bottle here. When I get a big bottle and I have just a little bit left, pour it in these cute little bottles, which are originally my kids' baby bottles. I've had them for like 10 years, but they're glass bottles and they come with lids and they're great for storing things. I like to reuse things. People call me crazy, but
I'm glad I didn't stumble across that with Miami.
You would have given it to Jack, wouldn't you? I probably should have labeled it wine, not grape juice. Hopefully the smell. But you want about 1/2 cup of red wine in here. And we're going to let this kind of simmer up. You want to make sure you scrape any of those seasonings that have stuck to the bottom of our pan. Scrape those up because we want them to add to the broth. And we're going to let these simmer for about, a minute or two, kind of cook off that red wine and really bring out that mushroomy flavor before we add in any more broth. So now we're going to work on our sandwiches, our pastrami. So I'm going to bring my skillet over here, and we're just going to do a quick cleanup of this messy mess. If anyone knows me, I'm not the cleanest person in the kitchen because I'm making art. It's all about the process. There we go. We're done. We'll need cream for our soup, so I'll put that over there. And now I'm going to bring my cutting. Done. We'll need cream for our soup, so I'll put that over there. And now I'm going to bring my cutting board over with our sourdough and all of our jazzy jazz for our delicious sandwich. Because if you make sourdough, you've got to make grilled cheeses. They're just, they're just meant to be. So I'm going to use up, I have just a little bit of my everything bagel loaf left with some onion. It had onion powder, everything bagel seasonings. It was so good. If you like an everything bagel or even the onion buns, this is where you want it. My husband, unfortunately, is not as big a fan, so he gets the plain Jane sourdough over here. And we're going to cut off a nice slice. So I'm just going to try to get 2 even slices for our sandwiches. We're going to do pastrami with a little bit of sauerkraut, havarti, and then my secret, a little bit of Chick-fil-A sauce. It really cuts down on the acidity of the sauerkraut as well as the spiciness of the pastrami. Not that pastrami is spicy, but it has a lot of spices. So like more of all the flavorings to it. Okay. And let me give our mushrooms over here. They've got a lovely simmer on them. Just going to give them a nice stir. I will say the thyme and the red wine and the garlic just smells delicious. We're going to coat one side of each slice of bread with some softened butter. And this is what's going to crisp up on our skillet. So I'll put one side face down. And here we go. And here we go. And I'm going to use, of course, my butter paddle. If you don't have a butter paddle, you should get one. I love them. I never had one, but got me one when she was in Sweden because my family's from Sweden and her mom lives there. And it is like the best thing. Even my kids are like, where's the butter paddle? It just spreads really nicely. And it has a cute little Swedish flag on it. So, of course, it's the best. There we go. So we're going to put our havarti cheese down. I like to use really mild cheeses when I'm working with pastrami because it is a very like flavored meat. And so you don't want anything too strong. You don't want a cheddar or whatnot. So I stick with either havarti, Gouda, Munster, any of the really like blander white cheeses, but have a good melting point. Because I find that like cheddar and pastrami just don't work as well together because they both have strong flavors that kind of fight each other in the sandwich. And then we've got our good old pastrami from the deli. And we just do a nice kind of thin layer of it. I'll make sure I give my husband plenty because yesterday he thought I was skimped out on the sandwich. You don't want to go too terribly thick because you do want to be able to melt the cheeses. And since the sandwich meat is cold, it can get a little bit harder to melt. Okay, here is my sauerkraut and my Chick-fil-A sauce. So I've got to add the sauerkraut and my Chick-fil-A sauce. So I've got to add the sauerkraut because pastrami is kind of a sweetened spice thing, and the acidity just marries well with those spices, almost kind of like a Reuben or whatnot. But you don't need a big, huge amount, just enough to really cut through that acidity, that sweetness, and that spice. And then this is the magic. Chick-fil-A sauce. I don't knock it until you try it, but it is just perfect for it. Again, you don't need a whole lot, just a nice little drizzle. And then we're going to do our last layer of just a nice little drizzle. And then we're going to do our last layer of havarti. Grab out my cheese slices here. And I will say havarti, Gouda, provolone, mozzarella, all those mild cheeses. I love havarti because it has a great melting point on it. It's a semi-soft cheese, so it melts really nicely. And it's less plasticky. I feel like sometimes provolone, if it's not done right, can be a very plasticky type of cheese. Havarti is just delicious. And then we are going to add our sourdough on top. And I'm going to turn my skillet on to about a 6. And we're going to let those cook up. Let's give our mushrooms beautiful, nice, lovely stir. And now we are going to add in about 4 cups of water, and then we're going to make a big scoop of chicken bouillon. There we go. And then I'm just going to kind of make sure I scrape up all of that stuff on the bottom. And then I'm going to turn my Dutch oven up so it comes to a nice simmer. There we go. And then we're going to use the big heaping scoop of chicken bouillon. This is going to give our saltiness in our thing, as well as add to just a really lovely flavor to the broth. And there we go. Perfect. Let me scrape that off. And we're going to give it a nice stir. And we'll add, once we are bring our soup back to a boil, we'll add in our tortellini, but you don't want to add them in until your soup is got a lovely boil. But we're going to prep our spinach that's going to go in our soup as well. This is what we add towards the end because you don't want it to wilt away. You want it to kind of keep its nice. It will be closer to 2 cups. It looks a lot more now, but we're going to do a couple little slices on it. This is baby spinach. I find baby spinach is really delicious in soup, especially at the last minutes because it's so tender. But regular spinach works well as too. And you could even use kale. I prefer baby kale over regular kale because regular kale would just need a little bit longer to cook. There we go. You could also use frozen spinach. That's also like you just would do probably like a 1 pound pack of frozen spinach. And that could add it in there as well. Here we go. So we've kind of got it nice and minced up. Perfect. And give this again a nice little stir. And let's check over here on our sandwiches. Let me get my spatula out. I think they still need a little minute. Yeah, just a little bit. Okay, so I'm just using regular cheese tortellini, but you could use a sausage tortellini or a mushroom tortellini, any of those ones that are flavored. I would kind of avoid like a lobster one or a fish one, but any one sausage, cheese, mushroom that are flavored. I would kind of avoid like a lobster one or a fish one, but any one sausage, cheese, mushroom, spinach would all go great in this soup. And you don't need a huge amount of tortellini because it will absorb some of the liquid and it will expand and get bigger. And if you put too much in there, then you're really going to have more of a pasta, a soupy pasta. So this is about probably like 1.5 cups. Okay, we almost have it to a lovely boil. I'm going to taste our broth real quick, see if we need to add any pepper or salt to it. We might add a pinch of pepper when we come back, but our scones are beeping. So I'm just going to put our pepper over here and then we can grab our scones out. I'm going to grab my oven mitts and I got my trivet already out there. Let's put these guys on. They smell delicious. Beautiful. You can see that nice kind of crystallized sugar on the top of our scones. They have puffed up beautifully. There we go. They smell absolutely delicious. They have that lovely strawberry shortcake ones. This is where I said they popped up nicely in here. We'll give them a second to set, but this is our scones with fresh strawberries cut up in them. And we did a nice little cream brush over with some sugar on the top for the perfect kind of semi-sweet, delicious kind of snack. Okay, we've got our soup here up to a lovely boil. So I'm going to add in a pinch of pepper. You don't need much. Just needed a little bit. And then we're going to put our tortellini in here. We're going to give it a nice stir. Beautiful. And once it comes up to another quick little boil, we'll add our spinach in. We'll add a little bit of cream in at the very end to give it that kind of a rich creamy thing. But I always add my cream in last because you don't want it to curdle. We've got our first flip of our sandwiches going here. This is really to melt the butter. The next one will be to cook through and give it that nice golden crust, but this is for our delicious pastrami. I have one on our everything bagel loaf and the other one's on our traditional one. We've got this back up to a lovely boil. We're going to add in our spinach. And perfect. And I'm just going to use my spatula here to kind of poke all of that spinach under. And we're going to give it a nice stir and toss it. There we go. And with tortellini only needs about 2 to 3 minutes to cook in the boiling things until it's done, which is so nice. You just want to make sure you add it in towards the very end of your soup, because if you add it in too soon, then it can start to fall apart. So it's one of those things like the spinach that you want to add to the very end so that it doesn't fall apart. I'm going to turn it down to about a 4. We're going to let it simmer. Just going to clean up this right out of the way. And then we are going to add some cream in just a second. We'll add about, I want to say, maybe between around a third a cup of cream. You don't need a lot of cream to give it that rich flavor. If you like a thicker soup, you can mix your cream with about maybe a fourth a cup of flour. So if you do a third cup of cream and a fourth cup of flour, mix it, and then you could add it into your soup to give you that really thick soup. But I am a fan of thinner, creamier broths, so I don't like to add the flour in. But I know lots of people love that really thick soup, and that's just made by adding flour to your cream. Let's see. We're going to start our flip, and we're going to do our last.
Question. Can you do cornstarch instead of flour?
Yes, you could do cornstarch. Now, what you want to do with cornstarch is slightly different. What you would do is you would say, like, you take a ladle and you would ladle out about, I want to say, a half a cup of your broth. Then you add about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch to that, and whisk that up, and then add that mixture back in. And then you can add some cream. If you mix the cornstarch and the cream together, it lumps up. And if you mix the cornstarch directly into your soup, it will lump up, and then you'll have like these chunky little dumplings. So you need to remove the broth out and mix it in a small bowl. And that's going to give you your really nice consistency. Okay, let's add our cream in. And so we're going to put in about a third of a cup. But again, I'm just going to eyeball it. So it's about a fourth. There we go. I'm going to give this a nice stir, and it's going to give it a nice kind of luscious, creamy broth, but it's not going to be overly indulgent. Beautiful. Perfect. And I like to do that because I like to add a little bit of creaminess, but you don't have to put it so much in that it's like just chock full of like fat. It gives it more of a nice velvety broth. Let's see what our grilled cheese is. Ooh, we are on our last little flip here. That one is nice and golden. This one needs about a minute more. So I'm just going to rotate my pan, and we're going to do this. And then I'm going to get our bowl ready for plating. So we've got our plate and our bowl here. Oh, I bet you, let's see if I'll show you our scones. So yeah, our scones have cooled down now. And here you've got this nice kind of crunchy bottom and top. But look, when we break open into it, look at these just delicious flakiness of it. They're going to be so delicious. You always want to wait like a few minutes before eating into them because they're really hot, and you want the steam to kind of evaporate out so it has this just lovely texture in it. It's kind of same with sourdough. You need to let the steam evaporate out before you like cut into it. So like with sourdough, you let them rest 10 minutes. With scones, about 5 minutes for them to cool off a bit. That way they get their nice little crunch, but still have that really flaky, soft middle. Okay, let's get ready to serve up lunch. I'm going to turn off our grilled cheeses here. And then I have a little bit of Parmesan cheese over here because I like to top my soup with some Parmesan cheese. So here, let's get our grilled cheese. We've got our pastrami with havarti and some sauerkraut. And then we're going to scoop up our tortellini soup here. Get a nice, and then of course, what I love to do is we're going to top it off with some of our Parmesan cheese here. And you don't need much, but just about maybe a tablespoon of the fresh Parmesan cheese right on top. It will melt into your soup and it'll be so nice and delicious with the tortellini and the creamy mushroom broth. And then we have our pastrami and havarti sandwich on our homemade sourdough bread for just the perfect lunch combo that is nice and rich. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're cooking and what we're making. Also, we do try to upload our videos on the link on our page within an hour or two after we're done, but you can always access our old content there as well. Again, thanks so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe.